Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, let's check in on the state of the economy in Pennsylvania. You know, we've got some rough patches out there. Gasoline prices up, health, the mortgage crisis, what's going on. Healthcare seems to be going up, and then we'll find out what's going on where. How about in the Pennsylvania legislature? All of that following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back. Well, as always, you know, every now and then we sort of check in on the state of the economy. We bring some folks who represent the business community on the program to give us an update. We'll try to figure out what's needed to stimulate the Pennsylvania economy, you know, to create jobs and improve the business climate. Joining me is Dave Taylor. He's the executive director. He's sitting right there of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. And next to him is Gene Barr. He's vice president of government and public affairs at the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. We got to shorten these titles.
Oh, we'll try. We got to work.
No, the only people, Gene, who have longer titles are professors and people in the academy. Well, look, guys, let's start a little bit about the health of the economy. I want to ask you both. You know, we have all this, as I pointed out in the promo, gas prices, you know about, everybody knows about those, subprime mortgage. Are we creating jobs, rising health care costs? Gene, let me start with you. Give us your sense about the situation in Pennsylvania with our economy.
Well, clearly Pennsylvania has got a lot to do. We've got a lot that we have to improve on. As Pennsylvania, as the U.S. goes, clearly Pennsylvania does as well. I mean, for years, Pennsylvania tended to be focused in a number of different areas. We tended to be a little bit more diversified, but we are experiencing the same things that others are. We've been, I think, a little fortunate in that we haven't had the huge run-ups in housing costs that have adversely impacted other states and other areas. So we're a little more fortunate in that. We don't have as big of a fall, let's say.
Right. And David, our unemployment is below the national average. Job losses don't seem to be as great. Job production, on the other hand, is...
Well, Terry, it's a tale of chronic underperformance. You know, we're not Zimbabwe. That's great. We're still putting one foot in front of the other. But when you compare Pennsylvania's competitiveness with other states, our performance is really subpar. Here's an example. From 2005 to 2006, our gross state product, that's the total value of all goods and services created in a year, we grew at 1.7%, creating $7.25 billion worth of wealth. The U.S. average was 3.4%. So basically, we performed at just half of the national average.
Okay, so that's in terms of the total output of goods and services.
Yeah, the wealth created, which is again is the bottom line number on the strength of our economy. And so when that number, only half the national average, places us 44th in the nation, you recognize that we've got a long way to go to improve our competitiveness, to add more value to the economy, to get us back towards the middle of the pack. So we absolutely should not be satisfied with things as they stand.
Gene, one of the things that we've talked about over the years, in fact, you know, the governor's been on the program. We've had lots of advocates for the expansion of government, of Pennsylvania government, particularly on the use of bonds to promote economic and community development. Some, what I hear different figures, well over $2 billion. You do agree there that during Rendell's administration he's pumped into the economy. Some like that, some don't. What's the upside and the downside of the government doing what it's done to try to stimulate economic growth?
Well, clearly the growth of government is a huge concern of ours. In fact, one of the most recent numbers that I saw is that the average weekly wage for a government employee is now higher than that for a private employee. That's very problematic. As we do this additional borrowing, it clearly increases the debt load and it clearly increases the future burden on taxpayers. And again, I think it's very problematic for us in that government is making decisions about where they're going to invest rather than having the market make those decisions, and the people who tend to be quite blunt, know those better. And that's a real problem for us.
Yeah, you agree?
Yeah, Gene's exactly right. And the spending in Harrisburg on, so-called economic development, the direct subsidization by government, is actually one of our chronic problems, that what would be much smarter would be for state government to build a more pro-growth environment rather than, as Gene said, having the state government spend money and distort the marketplace and have state government picking winners and losers.
All right, if you, in a perfect world for those of you who represent the business community, the Chamber more generally, and you obviously in the manufacturing sector, let's talk about what you think state government needs to do. At least let's introduce it. We've got to go to a break. But, Gene, what, overall, we can get into the details of what do you think government needs to do?
Well, clearly, Pennsylvania businesses never recovered from a devastating 1991 huge tax increase.
Okay.
One of the things we're advocating is bringing our tax structure more in line with where other states are. We have one of the most restrictive corporate business tax structures in the United States and arguably in the world. And we've got to address that.
All right, we're going to go to a break. Dave, we'll come back. I want to explore this because obviously there's some legislative remedies that both of you, I think, would advocate. All right, that's it. We're talking about the health of the business climate in the state. It affects all of us. We'll be back for additional comments following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back to the program. I'm chatting with Dave Taylor and Gene Barr, representative of this business community. We've had, Governor Rendell on just not so recently talking about his agenda. We're, I think, getting another point of view. Would that be a fair assessment, David?
Fair enough.
And we try to be balanced here on this program, have differing points of view. Now, Gene made the argument about the tax structure. Are there any other elements that are, related to the policy formulation that you'd like to see the legislature adopt?
Oh, well, sure. I mean, there's a whole portfolio of issues that need to be addressed, along with tax relief, lawsuit abuse reform, regulatory relief, labor law reform, state spending controls. I mean, there's a whole bunch of issues that need to be dealt with. But right now, the business community is focused on this budget process and on some pro-growth tax changes that would help Pennsylvania's economic performance. And this is the stimulus that we're asking for.
Right. The legislature has a lot to do here in this session. In fact, following this, we're going to get into greater detail with a couple journalists who cover this. It's a hugely ambitious agenda. What are the... you want to get rid of at least one of these notorious taxes that you all just... when I talk to you here, I can see you're going like this. Now, you want to just briefly explain
Absolutely, because I don't think we want to get in a lot of details on a Sunday morning for your viewers. But there's two really critical things, and in fact, the business community of Pennsylvania has rallied around these two. One of them is a provision in the way you calculate taxes that actually penalizes companies for hiring Pennsylvanians and putting buildings in Pennsylvania, and we're looking to change that. The other one is how we treat companies that are cyclical or new startups in terms of how we treat their net operating losses. We have one of perhaps the most restrictive law regarding that in the United States, and we've got to make those changes. And again, we've got the business community coalesced around that, saying now is the time to do that here in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, let's talk about, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say the name of the coalition is it's called Compete PA, and it's over 100 Pennsylvania businesses and employer advocates. It's essentially every prominent corporate citizen from Air Products to Zippo, and every association, including Gene's and mine, the Philly Chamber, the Pittsburgh Chamber, groups all across the Commonwealth.
Let's talk a little bit about legal reform. A couple of years ago, we did a lot of programs on it. It was really a big issue. You don't hear so much about it. Maybe your coalition is, and the sense was that, well, we were over the hurdle with this. We'd made some reforms. Venue change, and that's a question of where the cases get heard. Argument was made in some places are more favorable to plaintiffs, cases. What's your sense about where all this stands?
The trouble is we made some changes for the medical community. The business community is still struggling hugely with things like a lack of reform of what's called joint and several liability. One of 6 states that haven't done that, which is a system that goes after the person's perceived to have the deep pockets, the money, the insurance. We've got to do that. We absolutely, Terry, have got to do that here in Pennsylvania. It's a huge negative for Pennsylvania business, has an impact on health care costs, and we've got to do it. It's not part of the Compete PA, but it's something that Dave's organization and my organization and others feel quite strongly about. Doctors, hospitals, and business.
Absolutely, and like the Compete PA proposals, the sort of lawsuit abuse reforms that we're talking about here are standard practice in most other states.
Right.
And so again, we're just trying to make the kind of reforms in Pennsylvania that will bring us in line with neighbor states and competitor states.
Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you something that, I don't know that I'm sure you thought about this, but not something that we sort of chatted about. We hear all the time about the health care costs for small businesses. I mean, it has just become unfathomable. It's like business folks that I run into all the time are throwing up their hands. It's not that they don't want to provide the coverage, but here we've got escalating health care after stabilization. How important is that? Do you hear a lot of this from...
It's our number one.
Your number one area.
From our businesses, we hear energy, health care, business taxes tend to be traded among the top three. And when we talk about health care reform has to be more than figuring out who gets stuck with an inflated bill. We've got to address legal reform. Right. We have to address the issue of mandates on health insurance carriers, and we have to get people back in control of their health care costs and what they pay and understanding the cost of health care.
How about from your point of view?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, and that part of that is that we need to increase transparency with health care costs, what things cost and why, and part of that process is reauthorizing the Pennsylvania Healthcare Cost Containment Council, which is about to expire. So that's something that the legislature needs to act on before the end of June.
Now, I mean, most of the emphasis so far in our state has been on sort of covering the uninsured. Now, Governor Rendell and others have talked about ways to cut costs. I mean, there seems to be a consensus among Democrats and Republicans, labor and business, that health care costs have to be contained.
Absolutely.
I mean, if in fact we're to... Go ahead.
We need to get more value out of dollars already being spent. We need to get rid of inefficiencies, and part of the governor's proposal in terms of best practices for eradicating hospital-acquired infections, for the computerization of medical records. There are things along these lines that can increase efficiency, and I think there's consensus on those matters.
Okay, so some headway, but it's still you and both are...
a lot more to do.
All right, thanks for coming on. All right, when we come back, we're going to find out what's going on in General Assembly. Huge issues before the state government, perhaps the most ambitious agenda of any governor's second term. It's all coming to a huge debate in the General Assembly in the weeks ahead. Back with that following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, the legislature is back after its recess of a couple of weeks for the primary, and let me tell you, they're considering a whole bunch of things. Joining me, as often is the case, are two of the state's leading journalists, Amy Worden from the Philadelphia Inquirer and John Micek from the Allentown Morning Call. All right, both of you were covered, you're not involved, you were covering for your respective newspapers the constitutional amendment that would have banned gay marriage and civil unions. It was very controversial. There were demonstrations. John, let me start with you. It got tabled. It looks like it will not see the light of day. What's going on?
What happened was a day-long conversation between Senate leaders and House leaders about what would happen to this bill if the Senate were to pass it out. Turns out it would be sent to the House State Government Committee, conveniently chaired by Representative Babette Joseph out of Philadelphia, probably the single most liberal member of the General Assembly, and an absolute and utter foe of this marriage proposal. So seeing the writing on the wall, knowing that the thing had not a prayer of going anywhere, they pulled the plug.
Amy, now look, you cover a lot of controversial issues. I mean, how controversial, this was pretty, I mean, there were some heated exchanges, weren't there? Senator Fumo from Philadelphia and Senator Gortner, do I got that right?
Gordner.
Gordner, yeah, from northern part of the state. They got into talk a little bit about what you think, how controversial this was.
Well, the Senate leadership had clearly made this amendment a priority. And so we saw it moving through not one but two committees. In one case, actually, they held a hearing after the bill had already passed through the judiciary.
And that's a little unusual, right?
Extremely unusual, yes. So it was in front of the Appropriations Committee that Senator Fumo, who has quite passionately opposed this issue for years, finally just kind of blew his stack and basically said to an African American minister who was testifying that if given the chance, the Senate might just pass a bill to reinstitute slavery.
And that was created quite a stir.
Yes. So that was kind of laying the groundwork for the floor vote that never came.
Yeah. So no floor vote, John. Your best guess is this thing is dead now.
It seems to be the case. The weird thing it always seemed like it was a solution in search of a problem, which was Senator Jane Earl from Erie remarked on the same thing. It kind of bubbled out of nowhere. I mean, if you look at the political topography elsewhere in the country, this isn't an issue anymore. It's almost like we're in some sort of time warp back to 2006 or 2004.
There have been no challenges.
Yeah,
there have been no court challenges.
And we're a defensive marriage state,
exactly.
right? 1996,
yes,
no challenges. And I think there was a lot of speculation that, why was this brought up at this time, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, let's turn to another issue. Oh, here we go again. Governor Rendell not passed a single, the legislature's not passed one of his budgets on time. Am I right about that?
Yes.
5. 5, thanks, Amy. 5 not on time. All these huge issues. Amy, let's start with you. What's the climate like? I mean, is it as tense and as difficult as everybody seems to think it is?
Yes, I think you have the governor pushing to get two very big proposals through on this budget. As part of this budget, you have health care and you have energy. These date to the prior budget. So he's carried them over. He's saying, okay, now I want action as part of this budget. There's tremendous pushback from Republicans in the Senate on this, and I think there have been a number of kind of side issues floating out there that have created a real tension between Republicans and the governor. For instance, his campaigning for Senator Clinton before the Pennsylvania
For 7
primary.
weeks, everybody said.
Right. So they're saying he wasn't there. Of course, he says I would have given up any campaign appearance to talk budget issues. So you have that, and then you have the judicial nominees issue.
All right, we're going to take a break. I want to talk about some of these issues, the judicial nominees, and particularly health care and energy, which seem to be the two big ones. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy. And by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Amy Worden and John Micek, journalists. So, look, let's go to this business. There's a kind of a side diversion going on here. It's probably not helping the temperature, which is rising over in the Capitol even as we speak. And that has to do with these judicial nominations. John, talk a little bit about that.
The Senate Republicans are complaining about not having played their proper advise and consent role, which we were talking about off camera, actually means not having their fair share of the actual
this is four
nominees. We're talking about 4 nominees, 1 to the state Supreme Court, and then the 3 underbench, or 2 underbench, 3 underbench. And they're saying that Governor Rendell didn't consult them properly on the choice of nominees. That the 4 who are up, 2 of whom, ironically enough, are Republicans, come from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. So therefore, the diversity of the state is not properly representative.
So Amy, let's try to. John's got the facts out. Let's put this in perspective. There are 4 judges that or jurists that will be appointed for a limited period of time. They've agreed not to seek re-election. They're replacing people who either got aged out or left the bench.
Retired, yeah.
Retired. This has created, I mean, this is sort of a normal thing. They do a little trading, but this has become a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it has actually. The Chief Justice has now weighed in
that's right.
on this. Chief Justice Castillo wrote a letter to the Senate Republicans saying, for heaven's sakes, move this process along. It's
Because
really
the Supreme Court is burdened, is that it? Overburdened with
well,
work?
actually, he was saying all the courts, with minus
That's
the
right.
vacancies, that the judges who are seated are overloaded on their cases, and frankly, it's just disrupting the entire judicial system.
I guess when you get down to arguing about replacements on a court in situations in which they can't seek re-election, that's what we're...
It's a horrific omen of what's to come.
Yeah, you anticipated exactly, and Amy's agreeing.
They're arguing about Republicans. Two of these guys the Senate Republicans are arguing about Republicans. They can't even get that straight. If they can't reach agreement on that, God forbid what's going to happen when they start talking about leasing the turnpike or health care reform or any of these big ticket items. I mean,
health care,
they're drawing the line on the sand.
Are they the three, Amy, or that? We don't need to get into the details of it, but you write about this every day. What are the big 3 or 4 issues that our viewers ought to be paying attention to as we move through this cycle, to June 30? To get a budget which no one thinks will be done on time, but go ahead. I'll say that. I can editorialize a bit.
Yeah,
what are the big issues?
It's definitely safe to say that the governor's energy independence strategy and health care, providing expanding health care insurance to those who need it in Pennsylvania.
Lease the turnpike?
Yep.
I mean, now, John, will all this be sort of thrown into the general budget discussions without getting too much into the process?
If past practice is any indication, this will just be like one enormous, mess going forward. All of these issues, you'll have the actual budget, but these will be the chits that each side will use in order to get the final passage, as it's been the case for the last 6 years.
Now, Amy, we started with this, and it's a good place to end. Budget on time. They look like they're way late in kind of getting down to the negotiations, or maybe I'm wrong that it's always May, June. What do you think? Is this going to be done on by June 30? If you were a betting lady. What would you say?
No.
No, John. What do you think? You don't think so?
No. Nobody schedules vacation in early July anymore.
Vacations. Well, we'll see about that. But thanks as always for coming on. We're going to pay attention. We'll get you all back. We need to talk about energy and health care in greater detail. But compromises are going to have to be the order of the day to get these things through.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
All right. As always, thanks for coming on. All right. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.